Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Needy No More, the podcast dedicated to healing the anxious attachment style. I'm your host, anxious attachment style coach and author, Chris Ratcliffe. I've helped thousands of people across 6 continents to end the cycle of anxious attachment through my books, workshops, digital downloads, and coaching program. I'm excited to carry on that mission here on the show, sharing tools and techniques, principles, and practices for you to explore on your journey to growing more secure. Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm really super excited to dive in today. We have a very, very special guest who I will introduce now. Erika Ettin is the founder of A Little Nudge, a consulting company that helps people navigate the world of online dating, from first click to first date. Erika studied economics at Cornell University and received her MBA from Georgetown. She started A Little Nudge in 2011 after a 7-year career as an economist. She is responsible for many relationships, marriages, and the confidence some people simply need to get out there. A Little Nudge has been featured in media around the country, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, NPR, CBS, and Ask Men. And she currently writes a weekly syndicated dating column. Erika, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm like, I know her. She sounds great.
She does. And I already know this episode is going to pack a punch for the anxious attachers and disorganized attachers leaning anxious listening to this. I want to start out by just asking, why A Little Nudge? Where did that name come from for you?
It's the first name I thought of. When I knew I wanted to start the business, I brainstormed and it was the first name I thought of because I thought, I'm not doing everything for everyone. I'm giving people a little nudge. And so the website was taken, by the way. But there was nothing on it. It was like someone had bought it and just parked it there. And so, it's public record who owns stuff. So you can look that up. So it was, I don't know, some guy. And so I wrote to some guy and said, hello, I'm just a nice girl who wants to start a business. Can you please sell me the domain? And he did. And so I got A Little Nudge, and I think it's perfect for what I do.
I think it is. And I'm very familiar with your content. I love the no-nonsense approach and
Thank you.
the practicality that you offer of really helping people to approach conversations on dating apps, how to navigate the whole process from matching to coordinating the date to going on the date, etc. But for those who might not be familiar with your work, tell us about it.
Okay, so I started the business 15 years ago this month, and I help people. It started out all aspects of online dating. Now it's sort of expanded to all aspects of dating. But I consider my job, whether you do online dating or not, totally up to you. But if you are going to do it, I want to make sure you're doing it as well and efficiently and successfully as possible. And so a lot of my advice centers around how to present yourself well. Online dating is marketing of you. So I want to make sure you're marketing yourself. It also centers around how to have conversations on the apps so that you are efficiently getting to the date if you want to go on a date with this person. Because a lot of people do get stuck in that conversation stage and they end up with pen pals, and that's not really helping anyone. And then a big part of what I do is the communication aspect. So once you've met someone, how do you communicate with them? How do you communicate your likes, your dislikes, your needs? How do you ask for clarification? A lot of people, and I know we have a lot of overlap, a lot of people have anxiety around asking for what they want, asking for clarification, cutting things off when they know it's not what they want. And so if I can help someone through that process too, that is equally successful to me as getting you in a relationship.
Sure, yeah. Cutting off things that aren't working gets you closer to something that might be more in alignment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So really anything dating related, I'm comfortable with.
Love it. Maybe a tough question here right off the bat, but
Okay.
what's some of the worst dating advice you've either heard lately or recently? Like, give us some of the things that really get under your skin that you've heard
There's
online.
so much bad advice out there. It drives me bonkers. And I just hope people can differentiate, because there's clickbait advice, which is very divisive, which gets views. And then there's like normal, I like to think my advice is normal down to earth, pretty like even keeled advice, which is not clickbaity, but is consistent. Okay, so some bad advice that really gets my goat. When someone tells women that they should never go on a coffee date because they're, quote, low effort. It's like, get over yourself. Like, it's coffee. It's like, that's not the hill to die on, you know?
I've
Some
never heard that before.
Oh
That's
my
crazy.
God. It's everywhere. It's like if he asks you on a coffee date, he's not interested, he's low effort, he's dating everyone.
Mm.
And it's like I think some people equate effort with money. And so they would rather, if it's a woman dating a man, they would rather the man pick this expensive restaurant in his backyard than come up with, oh, I found this cute coffee spot near you and it has a nice little walk we could do after if we're enjoying ours. That's effort, you know? And so it's not that black and white. That advice, bothers me so much. Some people set up all of these obstacles before a first date. Well, I have to talk for this long, and then I have to exchange numbers, and then I have to have 3 phone calls, and then I have to have a FaceTime. And it's like, just go on a date. It's an hour out of your
So
life.
arbitrary rules.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just, it's an hour out of your life. If you don't like them, who cares? At least now you haven't spent all that time with all of these obstacles. Because you could grow a connection to someone in advance and just not hit it off in person. I'd rather you know that sooner rather than later.
I think getting to in person is so important because so many of us are trying to put our best foot forward online on social media and dating apps, which is not a problem per se, but sometimes things don't quite translate in person.
Exactly.
Oftentimes you're not hearing their voice, you can't see their gesticulation, you don't understand the intonation. There's so much that's lost in translation through a screen that in person going on a date can give you that data.
Completely agree. I was just talking to a woman actually right before this who was insistent on having a phone call with people before the date. And I said, if that works for you, I don't want to change your process. However, what a lot of people forget is they're using this phone call as a vetting mechanism to essentially cut people, to say no. And I said, I just want you to remember, they can cut you too. Because I had a client recently, and I don't say that to be rude, but I had a client recently who insisted on a phone call. She really liked the guy on a phone call, and he declined seeing her after the call. We have to remember it works both ways. If you're trying to rule people out, they're going to do the same. And so I'd rather just everyone have an opportunity to meet face to face and just see how you feel.
Is your advice to transition to IRL sooner
Yes.
rather than later then?
Few messages back and forth. Make sure the person seems like decently normal, whatever that means to you. Make sure they don't get gross. 4 criteria, really. Make sure they ask you questions back. They show some curiosity about you. 2, make sure they don't get gross or sexual. 3, make sure they complete in mildly complete sentences, not like HMU, WYD, whatever. Just like they speak like a grown up.
You up?
Yeah, you can't even. And 4, they can lock down a plan. Unfortunately, many people don't satisfy those 4 criteria, in which case you're never getting to a date. But if they do, I would go on a date. Yeah.
I've seen a good amount of your content that has been tied to a poll of your audience to get a sense of, should this person go on this date when things might be a little bit confusing or nebulous?
Right.
Like, what are some tips that you have for folks watching or listening when they might be a little bit confused? Are we still on for the date? How do I confirm the date?
The confirmation. Oh, that's another piece of it. Okay. That's another one that I hate the advice. It's usually someone telling women who date men, if you don't hear from him the day of the date, you're not going, which is so very wrong. Okay? So my rules of date confirmation are when you set up the date, time, date, location, once that's all arranged, I don't care what day or how many days in advance, you have a date. Okay? Let's say it's arranged, though, 4 or 5 days in advance. I agree that you want a final see you there, whatever. It makes everybody feel better. However, we can't assume that if you don't get that, the date is off because nobody has canceled. So my rule is if you have arranged the date more than 2 days in advance, on the day before the date, simply say, looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Not, are we still on? Because are we still on indicates a lack of trust, a sort of weakness in the process, a lack of confidence. Whereas looking forward to seeing you tomorrow is, yeah, obviously it's on. We arranged this date. That's the confident approach. A lot of women don't want to do that last confirmation because they think he should know to do it. I am telling you, he does not know to do it because a lot of men make the thing, put it in the calendar and think, we're on. I show up.
It's
now.
done.
Exactly. And so it's like women thinking that men think how women think, and men thinking that women think how men think. And everybody loses if we don't open our mouths.
Very, very well said. I love the positive confirmation aspect because that positive assumption does carry a lot of confidence and security for folks who are anxious attaching or might
Yes.
lean that way. Sometimes we can get in our head and sometimes we can question, well, I haven't heard from them. Is this still on? Unless you hear otherwise, you should assume that the plan that you have coordinated is still on.
Correct.
Positive assumption.
Absolutely. That's my rule. But again, like I said, it is nice to do that day before. I'll see you there because it feels good. But I understand getting in your head and thinking, we haven't talked in 3 days. I can tell you from the guy's perspective, he's probably thinking, well, I got the date. I don't want to screw this all up. I better shut my mouth until the date.
Yeah, and that might be for the best.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sometimes it's best that we close our mouths until we get on the date and get that.
And so, I hate to make that, I work with everyone. I hate to make this one gender normative, heteronormative, but I will say it is a lot of women thinking the men should do this, men thinking and it's like, let's stop with the shoulds.
I think that's really potent and powerful for people to hear. Don't assume the other person is exactly like you, thinks like you, feels the way that you do. Especially early on in dating, you haven't really gotten to know that person. You don't know their personality, their character. You haven't really gotten an assessment of who they are. And so in the absence of that, it's best to keep an open mind, try not to judge, and look at it as an exploration, because many of the people you go on dates with are probably not going to translate to second dates.
And that's okay.
And that's okay. Yeah, you might just end up being acquaintances. You might not ever see one another again.
Never speak again, whatever, it's fine. I mean, that's why I teach dating NATO, not attached to outcome, which does help with anxiety. Because if you go into a date thinking, I need to find out if this is my future fill in the blank, spouse, partner, whatever, that puts too much pressure on you and this other person, right? Instead, I want you to go in thinking, I'm going to meet a new person. Let's see what happens. We can't predict the future. Why bother trying? I don't want you to leave that date knowing really anything other than, did I have a nice enough time? Did I smile? Did I feel good? Am I curious about this other? Basically, do I want to have one more conversation with this person? If yes, go on another date. If no, don't.
There's a lot of future tripping that anxious attachers can experience. So sometimes when we're excited about a person, we might already be planning the relationship. We might even be at the altar with that person in our minds, thinking, does this have the potential to go that far? Could they be a long-term partner? Try to bring the focus back, everyone. I know it can be hard. It's okay to be excited.
Yeah.
But you have to measure that excitement. Cautious optimism is something that I espouse in my work. Be optimistic, of course. It's great to connect with someone and to have a good conversation on an app or even in real life and to want to see them again. However, we don't know that they feel the same, and it's important to allow the process to unfold naturally.
Completely agree. And on the flip side of that, equally stressful is I don't know how I feel, so do I keep going out with them because I don't want to mislead them? I deal with people who say this all the time, and I say, if you're continuing to go out with someone to see how you feel, you are not misleading someone. Leading someone on is knowing you don't want to see them. That's leading somebody on. I'll give an example. I have a woman who I'm working with right now. She's been seeing a guy for maybe a month and a half, okay? And she likes him. She clearly likes him enough. She keeps going out with him. And after every date, she has a nice time, and she's stressing herself out so much to the point of like, I don't know if this is it. And I said, you don't need to know. Let's take it one date at a time. And they went to a hockey game last weekend. And I told her to pretend the world ends at midnight. And so there is no future. So can you just enjoy the hockey game? And every time you think, oh, what is tomorrow? What is next? There is no tomorrow. She found that to be very helpful. Does that advice work for everyone? No. But for someone who's trying to think too far into the future, either way, it might be helpful.
Well, tomorrow is truly never guaranteed, and
Never
the future
guaranteed.
is
So have fun at the
only an
hockey game.
idea. Have fun at the boy aquarium.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And for fans of heated rivalry, I'm sure that, going to a hockey game is even spicier nowadays than it ever
Absolutely.
has been. What do you have to say to folks who might be hesitant to date again after getting their heart broken? Because many of the folks that I speak to and work with are, if they're not currently in a tough relationship dynamic, have had a series of experiences that have been defined by emotional unavailability, by inconsistency, by folks who really didn't choose them fully. So there's a lot of apprehension and anxiety and worry and doubt about the process. What do you have to say to those folks?
You always take a risk in life, anytime you do anything in life, but especially open your heart to somebody. It's a known risk that you're taking. The risk that you could get hurt and the risk that you could hurt somebody else. And so you could never date again, and you will avoid that hurt. That's a valid option if that's what you want. However, if someone is at the point of coming to me, that's not what they want because they've sought out someone to help with dating, right? So we talk about that inherent risk. And instead of making it something, woe is me, I could always be broken up with, I could always have my heart ripped out, I try to make it a more empowering tool. Everything in life is at will, meaning anyone can leave you at any time and you can leave anyone at any time. So it's scary on the one hand, but it's also the most empowering thing because you control that. That does help sometimes. But no, it is hard knowing that putting yourself out there could lead to heartbreak, but could also lead to the best experience of your life. And so I try to make things more tangible, more bite-sized chunks. Let's not think about that. Let's think of like going on one date. Let's go through the motions of creating the profile, reaching out to people. Let's do one step at a time so everything feels a little bit less overwhelming. Like, are you a to-do list type person? I'm asking you.
I am.
I am
Yes.
too. Because I find that it's so satisfying to cross things off the to-do list, even if it was a simple thing. So I try to get clients to do that too. So they're not thinking of, oh my gosh, I'm dating now. It's more, I sent out 3 messages today. So I like sort of bite-sized, tangible steps in the process, not this big, scary thing.
So break it down into practical steps instead of thinking conceptually about what could happen.
Correct.
Focus on just the next best step or choice that you can make.
Exactly. Because of course it feels like this horrible gray cloud over you if you're always worried about getting your heart broken. How about let's worry about, getting back to people in 24 hours if they've written you a message,
That's a good rule to keep. What are some other communication tips that you have for folks who are actively dating? Communication is something many anxious attachers are innately good at because they're
Sure.
emotionally intelligent, and that's been hard won through a good amount of trauma, usually.
Sure.
From growing up, usually, too. But how do they navigate communication with a little more confidence? How do they get over the idea of double texting or worrying about receiving a response back? What do you have to say to that?
What is my line? If they like you, they won't mind. And if they don't, they won't care. You can always tell yourself that.
If they like you,
they won't mind an extra text. And if they don't, they won't care.
So either way, you're not losing.
Send the text. Not like an obsessive, 8 texts in a row. But I don't like to jump to conclusions. So let's say, for example, someone has been consistent with you in their communication. And one day they are inconsistent and we don't know why. Rather than jumping to, they've ghosted me, they've completely lost interest. 2 things you can do here. 1, give the benefit of the doubt. We are coming from a track record of consistency. So rather than jumping to conclusions, let's lead with curiosity and say, hey, I haven't heard from you. I usually do. Are you okay? That's number 1. Because that assumes their one day of inconsistency has nothing to do with you.
And that's the irregularity.
Correct.
Yes.
Or 2, I don't like inconsistency. Does this work for me? That's the other way to look at it. Not did they stop liking me, but more, I like consistency. Maybe this isn't for me.
And if you see this over the course of a few more experiences with them or
Yeah.
dates with them, then potentially this does become a pattern rather than a
Correct.
one-off
Exactly.
experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's like in the nicest way possible, none of us is special. We're all very special, obviously. But sometimes things don't have to do with us. Like, a lot of people who are anxiously attached, let's say, for example, you text your friend and they don't get back to you. A lot of people will think, oh my gosh, why is my friend mad at me? It has nothing to do with you. Your friend is not mad at you. Your friend got busy, And so it's like a life lesson that is important to remember. Again, in the nicest way, we're not special. And it's so freeing when we remember that. Like, not everything is about us.
Yes, not taking things personally can
Yeah.
be really, really challenging.
Yeah. You want to
Especially
hear
when
something
you've
funny?
been through. Yeah,
Sorry, I
yeah.
didn't mean to interrupt.
All good. Yeah. What's
So,
funny?
I was working with this client and she puts too much value on being in a relationship. She thinks it defines her value, which obviously it does not. I am not a therapist, which I'm very clear about, but it does creep into that territory sometimes. And she sees a therapist, but we were talking about it and she was taking a trip by herself. And she said, I'm trying to get over the mindset of like, everyone's looking at me by myself. I'm a loser. And I'm like, first of all, they're looking at you thinking, first of all, they're not looking at you. And second, if anything, it's like good for her. She's traveling by herself. But so I said to her what I just said in the nicest way. Nobody cares about you. With love, you know what I mean. And it was funny.
Of course.
I was repeating this story to a friend of mine at lunch. And I said that I had said, nobody cares about you. And at that very moment, the waitress came over and she goes, she thought I was being mean to my friend because I go, nobody cares about. She goes, no, people care. But I'm like, I know. It was so funny.
The worst time to overhear.
It was so, I'm like, I'm not a jerk. I'm a very nice person. It was really funny.
Oh my goodness. Look, I think it's a really good point to underscore here that people have other things going on. We are all managing a lot. Times are really stressful. We have more on our plate than perhaps we ever have. There's a lot of distraction in our culture, and busyness is celebrated nowadays. And so I think it's important to remember, try to not take it personally because there's a lot of other viable, valid excuses for why they're not responding. And what's most important here is to recognize your own personal desire to communicate and for clarity.
Right.
That's the data that your nervous system, your body, your brain is all telling you in that moment. So if you want to communicate, which your system is telling you that you do, then communicate. Try to do so from a space of, again, positive assumption, not assuming something is wrong, but you can check in and say, similar to what you mentioned, Erika, usually I hear from you by now and I haven't.
Exactly.
How's your day been?
Right. And if you're afraid to ask for clarification like that, you can always go through the worst case scenario in your head. And the outcome is never as bad as that. Okay, worst case, you check in and you never hear from them again. I guess you're ghosted, in which case that tells you way more about the other person than it does you. It tells you that the other person is a coward and can't communicate when they're not interested. That's not someone you want to be with. Or they could come back and be like, how dare you double text me? That's not somebody you want to be with. And so it's like, you always kind of get what you want from communicating, even if it's not what you actually want, because you get information. And in the early stages of dating, we're collecting information. And then we're using that information to decide if we want to keep dating them.
Very well said. I love the whole data gathering approach to early stages
I'm a former
of
economist,
dating.
so, comes with the
I was
territory.
wondering if that factored in here.
I like data.
For you.
I mean, I think, I've always been analytical and I like data. And look, in dating, nothing is a science, right? But I do think of it like data collection because sometimes when we get too far ahead of ourselves, we forget that we're still learning about this person. We think it's a foregone conclusion. And sometimes people think the other person has answers that we don't. Like, why can't they just tell me they're ready to be? They don't know they want to be with you yet either. And so everyone has to take an active role.
That speaks to a common theme in some of your responses that I'm picking up that I want to name, which is really important for anxious attachers to hear. And that is to remember that you have a sense of agency.
Correct.
You are not at the mercy of whether or not someone wants to keep seeing you. You get to determine for yourself the level of alignment present.
Yes.
If you feel the kind of safety that, as an anxious attacher or disorganized attacher leaning anxious, you absolutely must have in
Right.
order to feel secure in
Right.
your connection or
Mm-hmm.
to have enough security to pursue something further.
Right.
So remember that if you're watching or listening, you get to decide for yourself. You always have agency, and that
Yeah.
is the most empowering thing that you can remember when you are dating.
100%. Can you tell me more about disorganized attachment? I don't really know about that.
Of course, yes, disorganized attachment or fearful avoidant attachment or
They're
anxious
synonymous?
avoidant attachment, they are.
Okay.
Yes, depending on the attachment model, you might hear one or the other used. I like the one word
Yeah.
labels for the style. So anxious, avoidant, disorganized, secure.
Yeah. So tell me more about disorganized.
A disorganized attacher struggles with both anxious and avoidant tendencies.
Okay.
It can be the most volatile and unpredictable of all of the attachment experiences
Mm-hmm.
because one minute you might be struggling with desiring closeness, not
Mm-hmm.
knowing where you stand with someone,
Mm-hmm.
having a deep fear
That's
of
the
them leaving, cheating.
Okay.
That's the anxious part. And then the next minute, you might feel smothered by that person.
I
You
see.
might feel like you need space. You might feel like, ugh, I need to disengage. And so you bounce back and forth between these extremes, sometimes minute to minute or hour to hour, day to day.
Question for you. So you're more of an expert in attachment style. Obviously, I work with a lot of people who come to me and say, I have an anxious attachment style or I'm anxiously attached. And I will sometimes push back, and I'd like your opinion on this because I know about attachment theory, obviously, but I do sometimes feel that people use the term as a crutch to explain why they're doing the behavior they're doing rather than looking into the individual situation to assess how they feel in that moment. So, for example, you're coming to me and saying, well, I behaved this way because I'm anxiously attached. Well, maybe this person just clearly did something to make you feel anxious. And so I try to separate the title from the actual feeling. Is that something?
Love it.
Okay. I wanted to hear your
That's
opinion on that.
definitely philosophically aligned with how I have always approached this work.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is context dependent.
Right.
Anxious attachment is a pattern that has developed over the course of several experiences. For many folks, this isn't true for everyone, but for many folks, this pattern is also directly traceable to experiences from early development
Yes, I've
or
read about it.
childhood.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of instability in the environment growing up. Maybe there was a divorce. Maybe there was a lot of conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you just never had the opportunity to discuss feelings
Right.
at home.
Right.
Maybe when you were crying, you were told, go to your room
Right.
until you're finished. There's a lot of different expressions of trauma and invalidation and instability. But for many folks, that is true. It comes in a lot of different flavors and forms and experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a pattern. It is not just experienced in one relationship. Now, of course, every relationship we have either helps us grow more secure or more insecure. And it's important to remember that attachment styles are not fixed.
Right.
It's
Well,
always
what you just said,
changing.
exactly. I think sometimes labels make things seem fixed. And I
Of
agree that
course,
this
yeah.
it's dynamic.
I consider myself secure now. Part of my whole approach to this work is that I used to struggle with anxious attachment. I know what it's like to be up at 3 a.m.
Sure.
checking Instagram
Right. Did
stories
they
and
text
snap
me back? Did
maps
they look
and
at my story? Did they fill in the blank?
exactly, yes. The protest behavior, the baiting
Mm-hmm.
of posting online specifically so that person will see it in the hopes that they'll
Right. I
interact
get it.
with
You're
it.
human. We all are.
And so with that in mind, I understand the struggles of my clients very intimately and can call them out compassionately when they might
Of
be
course.
in that space because we know where that goes. And again, to the point of agency, remembering you can't control what the other person does or doesn't do.
Yeah.
But you can speak up for yourself if you're noticing a pattern
Right.
of behavior from a specific person, of inconsistency, feeling unsafe in the connection, so not really knowing where you stand with them or
Right.
knowing what they want.
Mm-hmm.
And you can always ask for clarity. And to your point, Erika, the data we gather by doing this is something many anxious attachers rob themselves of by
Yeah.
not speaking up.
Exactly.
So it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy here, where by withholding, you might protect yourself, but you keep yourself confused.
Yes.
If you honor your need for clarity, then even if you don't like the response, which, to be fair, you're going to experience a reaction
Of
to,
course. Exactly.
but learning to be with those emotional responses is essential for growing more secure. Your partner, no matter how secure they are, is going to trigger you. You're going to be disappointed by them. They are a human being.
Exactly.
So it's always context dependent, to get back to your question, but this is usually a pattern over the course of multiple
all that was all
relationships.
very, very well said.
Thank
An
you.
example I got on Monday when someone submitted a question. She said, I've been dating someone for 3 months. I really want to bring up the define the relationship conversation, but I'm afraid this person will say they're not ready. And I responded that you could live in the status quo and try to protect yourself and protect the other person and not get what you want, or you could bring it up. You may not get what you want, or you may get exactly what you want. But what you will get is information to decide how to move forward. And I said that 3 months is a very appropriate time to bring that up.
Absolutely. Yes, there's the 3-month rule for a reason. That's
Wait,
generally
what's that? I don't
enough
have a rule.
time.
What is this 3-month rule? I like 3 months. I mean, that's kind of my threshold too when I give the advice,
Yeah.
but
I'm not sure where this came from, or where I even heard it from, but it's just so prevalent in dating and in our society that I guess 3 months is enough time to gather enough data.
I think it is
Maybe
too. What
maybe
I do
people can't wear a mask beyond that point.
Right. I do think sometimes people, especially those with anxious attachment, do try to lock things down too early sometimes because it feels more stable if you have a title, if you have defined the relationship. And I advise against that because it's actually a false sense of stability if you haven't built a solid foundation yet. Also, I say this ad nauseum, but the behavior you're getting before you decide to be exclusive is the exact behavior you're getting after. And so, if you want to lock something down because you think now someone is going to be more responsive to you or a better partner, that's not true. And so, don't lock something down. When I say lock it down, exclusivity, partner, boyfriend, girl, whatever you want to call it, until you know that that's the behavior you want.
Very well said. And one of my favorite quotes of all time when it comes to relationships and dating is from Dr. John Van Epp, who wrote How to Avoid Falling in Love with a Jerk. And
Good title.
he writes, great title, but really substantive book, in which he says, your experiences dating with someone is as good as it gets in a marriage with that person.
100%. If
A
anything, it'll
label
go
does
down.
not change it.
Right.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. And following that, he says the good usually gets worse and the worst stays the same.
Correct. Yeah, it's like if you're at a job, do you usually get promoted because you've been doing the job of the promotion level and then the title just goes with it? Yes. It's not like, oh, I've been doing really well for a week, so they just promoted me to president and now I do the No, that's not how it works.
Absolutely. Great point. I want to circle back to the defining the relationship moment, just because that is something that is top of mind for many anxious attachers.
Absolutely.
I have a recommendation for folks, which is always to approach this by asking for what you want, by declaring what you desire.
Agree.
Okay. I wanted to make sure you're in alignment with that. My approach is always to just say, hey, I've really been enjoying getting to know you. I've loved our dates. So you always want to talk about what it is that specifically you like about the person and the connection. Try not to be super general or nebulous, just because those kinds of compliments can feel canned, I suppose. And then say what it is that you want. I'm feeling like I'm ready to take our connection to the next level. How are you feeling about that?
I fully agree
Always
with everything you just said.
Okay, wonderful. I love the idea of the open-ended question too, and allowing the other person to speak. Don't ask a leading question like, are you ready to be in a relationship with me? Which feels very pressuring. But say, how do you feel about that? And just see what they say. Don't lead them to a certain response that you desire.
No notes. I totally
Ooh,
agree. I get a question all the time. How do I ask, what are we? And my answer is exactly what you just said. No one gets to define what we are. You define what you, no one can determine for you what we are, right? So I agree. Go in saying exactly what you want. I'm at a point, whatever you just said. Yeah, same thing. How do you feel about that? Hmm.
what are we? My goodness.
Well, it's like, why are you ceding all of the decision making to the other person?
That point right there. Yes, again, back to the point of agency.
Hmm.
Asking for what you desire is one of the strongest things that you can do to try to get what it is that you desire by naming it specifically. It doesn't guarantee
No, of
that the other
course not.
person is going to acquiesce or give it to you, but whether it's saying, I would like to check in throughout the day. How does that sound to you? How
Hmm.
would that work for you? How can we make that happen in a way that works for both of us? Trying to be inclusive and collaborative, I think, is something that many people overlook. And when you know what you want, which might be half the battle for folks,
Sure.
then the other half is declaring it,
Correct.
not framing it as a question, but saying what you are ready for or what would help you to feel more connected, more appreciated, more understood, more loved and cared for.
Right. And it's always best to know if you're not going to get that versus, again, sitting in the status quo, not getting what you want because you're afraid to ask for it.
Data, 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 information. Yes.
Exactly.
Don't rob yourself of receiving that by not speaking
Hmm.
up.
Yep. We're in alignment.
Love it. I figured we would be.
Good.
That's why I wanted to have you on the show.
Thanks.
Of course. Okay, so for anxious attachers, getting into a long term relationship, the first secure relationship or stable experience after the string of insecure, unstable,
Hmm.
uncertain ones can also be really challenging.
Hmm.
And I have a lot of experience working with clients who have a lot of doubt, who
Yeah.
might question, I don't know, I don't feel that chemistry, that
I have a whole
spark.
section I just wrote. I have a book coming out next year and I wrote a whole section on this.
Tell us, distill it down.
I think it comes under the umbrella of self-sabotage because if you're not used to this feeling of safety, it might feel boring. And you might want to escape because you're like, well, this person can't be it because I don't feel excited all the time. That excitement might have been the roller coaster you were on because you never knew what you were getting from this other person you were dating. Safety doesn't feel exciting sometimes, but that doesn't make it worse. It makes it better because at least it's predictable. You know what you're going to get. But I don't think people mean to self sabotage, but sometimes when something is unfamiliar, it feels wrong. But it could be very right. We just have to accept it.
Reacquainting your nervous system and reorienting it
Hmm.
towards what safety actually feels like and
Hmm.
redefining that
Hmm.
as good versus bad
Hmm.
is important.
Hmm.
And also, as I tell people all the time, it feels like something is missing because it is. You don't have the confusion. You
Yes.
don't
I
have
love how you
the
said that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You don't have the cortisol, you don't have the adrenaline, you
Mhm.
don't have the experience of not knowing where you stand, which is unusual. And many anxious attachers like to be in the role of the pursuer, the fixer,
Mhm.
the chaser.
Mhm.
And when you step out of that,
Mhm.
it feels deeply uncomfortable
Very
and
uncomfortable,
very
yes.
unusual.
Right.
But that is because of what you named, which is that it is just unfamiliar to your nervous system.
Right. And it feels more comfortable sometimes. A lot of anxious attachers are waiting for the other shoe to drop at all times of every day, which is exhausting. And sometimes they'll get out of a situation because it's more comfortable to get a certain no, even if it's self imposed, than an uncertain maybe or relationship.
Learning to live in the uncertainty is
That was going to be my next
really hard.
sentence. Exactly. It is very hard, but it's a worthwhile lesson.
Yes, I mean, holistically in your life too, because
Well, yeah. I
when you're
don't even just mean in dating. Sure.
yeah. When you're interviewing for a job, you don't know who the other candidates are. When you're dating someone, you don't know who else they're dating and how those experiences are going. You don't know anything. And it's best to, again, bring that focus back to yourself.
Hmm.
Remember what you bring to the table, what
Exactly.
the folks watching and listening, qualities of yourself that you know other people appreciate, that your friends tell you,
Hmm.
that you're loyal or you're
Right.
communicative or you're funny or whatever it might be.
Right.
Stay rooted in that.
And if someone doesn't see that in you in the end, then you shouldn't be with that person. Someone once said this to me and I loved it. Your essence is the thing that you love the most about yourself that someone else will love too. If someone doesn't love your essence, screw them. They're not your partner.
If someone doesn't love your essence, they're not your.
Yeah. If they don't love the things that you love about yourself, like if you tell corny jokes, I don't want you to be with someone who rolls their eyes at your corny jokes. I want you to be with someone who finds those corny jokes that you love endearing. I don't want you to be with someone apologetically.
It just keeps getting better and better. Keep going.
Can I stop now? I'm done.
My goodness. I want your take on this. I've heard that consideration is the highest form of love. What do you think about that?
Like consideration for another person?
Like consideration, similar to what you were just saying, considering someone's essence, learning someone over time. Like, for instance, if you know that your partner hits snooze and you know that they're going to miss an appointment and you don't want them to be uncaffeinated when they go to this appointment.
Yeah, no,
so
I
you
agree.
make them their coffee, things like that.
I think consideration is extremely important. Noticing things, all of that. Yeah, all really important. On the flip side, I will say nobody is perfect. And so I think sometimes we have to remember that everyone has, I call them perceived flaws. Everyone has a set of perceived flaws. They're not actual flaws, they're not red flags, but a perceived flaw could be the corny jokes. It could be that you hit snooze. It could be any of the examples we just said, right? Whatever. That's nothing wrong. It's just a personality thing, right? Anyone you end up with is going to have some set of these, and you just basically have to decide which ones you can live with and which you can't, because you're not going to change someone, nor should you.
You're not going to change someone, nor should you. Perceived flaws.
Yeah, like
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So, many people call it the ick. I got the ick because this person did this thing. Okay, you may not like how they laugh. Someone else might love it. It's not a flaw. It's a perceived flaw. Can you live with it? Great. If it's too much and you can't, that's fine. It's not that they're bad. It's just not for you. At a certain point, we have to decide which ones we can live with and which we can't. But yes, I don't know how I got on that. But yes, consideration is an important part of love, of course.
I love this because I just did a bonus episode on the show, a kind of 15-minute rant about being cringe in dating and the ick in dating and how being real and raw and vulnerable can be really scary. But in order to have a real connection, the kind of depth that many anxious attachers desire but don't bring to the table usually, you've got to be real yourself. And sometimes that might feel very uncomfortable. You might feel very cringy, double texting or declaring what you desire like we talked about. But unless you're willing to put it out there, you're probably not going to just have it land in your lap.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I just thought of one other thing on the consideration topic. You have to be doing considerate things because you want to be doing them, not because you want credit. Huge pet peeve when someone does something nice and then they say, well, I did that. Yeah, we noticed. And now you negated it by telling me you did it. I got it. We all got it. And it's like, you should be doing it because you want to do it, not because you want the other person to notice or because you want a point in your favor.
I know many anxious attachers need to hear that because they are accustomed to over-functioning in their relationships.
I use that word sometimes too.
To try to earn that love and affection and belonging, and yet when they do this, it creates oftentimes an imbalance in the dynamic.
It does. It does. So I have a lot of people who I use the same word, overfunction, and it's because they are so anxious that it's not going to get done. So I better do it or else it's not going to get done. I can relate in my personal life in that I'm a planner with most of my friends, right? And sometimes I feel frustrated because certain friends our friendship isn't as equal. I feel like I'm the one driving it. And so sometimes instead of taking charge like I would normally do, I say, here's when I'm available. Here's what time I'm free. Can you plan something for us? I'm having a really busy week. If they don't, I've learned the information I need. And it's okay if we don't see each other that week. And with anxious attachers, it's important to become comfortable seeing what people are capable of without you jumping in and doing it for them first. I get it. I'm type A, you know?
Same.
Yeah.
And many anxious attachers are because
Right.
of, the experiences that they've been through that
Absolutely.
have informed
So
that
everyone's in
approach.
good company.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And it's okay to be an organized person. It's okay to be a planner. And oftentimes, what I find, at least in relationships, is one person is usually better at planning than the other. And identifying and respecting that is very important. But what you communicated that is very subtle that I want to identify for folks watching and listening is you didn't just stay silent in your friendship. You communicated your availability and you requested for them to plan something. There's a saying that uncommunicated expectations turn into real resentments. I
Yeah.
see you smiling. Yes,
Yeah,
you're familiar with this.
It's true. It's a great statement because it's the truth.
Absolutely, yes. And of course, you're going to grow resentful when you're holding it all in, but the other person doesn't know what you want inherently. They can't read your mind. So, what you did is you established the expectation, you gave them the time that you were available, and regardless of whether it worked, you honored yourself. Back to the agency component here
Exactly.
for folks to hear. You can always let someone know. And I just had this conversation with a client of mine the other day who's been on 4 dates with someone and is hoping that the other person might plan something instead. And I told him, great, that's not a problem, but communicate that. Make that expectation
I would love for you
known.
to plan our next date. Simple. And if
Perfect.
that other person says absolutely not, well, then stop dating them.
Yeah, because you can't put in all the effort. You can't make all
Not
the
forever.
reservations or all the plans.
No.
No. And part of the data gathering, too, is the fun, the excitement of seeing, like, where are they going to
What did they
take
come up
me?
with? Exactly.
Yeah. That's the fun in this, too. And I don't want that to get lost in translation for folks either.
Me neither.
Dating can be challenging, and it comes with a whole slew of emotional experiences, some of which are not very pleasant. But it can also be really fun.
Yeah.
And
It should be fun. I know it feels functional sometimes, but the word fun is infunctional. I want it to be fun because if you're not having fun in the early ultimately whoever you decide to date, you should be having fun. So I don't want the dating process to be devoid of fun. I always thought it was funny on The Bachelor. I remember it was Pilot Pete, who it was not a good season. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He was like, I'm not here to have fun. I'm here to meet my wife. And I thought, the process of meeting your wife should be fun.
And also, it's The Bachelor. You're in a helicopter in Fiji. Is that okay? Is that not fun?
They're not mutually exclusive. Anyway.
Yeah, I think this hits at something that I want to name for people too, which is embody your values in values-based dating. It's not about checking off a list of, does this person value honesty and integrity and communication and fun? It's about you bringing that to the table and seeing how they respond to it. So if in planning yourself a fun date for the two of you, that person doesn't enjoy it, they don't respond well to it, that is important for you to understand. And this will naturally drive some people away.
And that's
which is uncomfortable.
Yes.
But it is okay.
It is.
Erika, this has been a fabulous, wonderful conversation. There's so many nuggets of wisdom from today that I know people will be circling back to and listening to again. How can people find you and any resources you want to share before we depart today?
You can find me anywhere. A little nudge, my website, Instagram, a little nudge, just dating coach Erika. I'm pretty easy to find. Anyone who's considering working with me, I always offer a free 20-minute consultation to see if we're the right fit. So you're more than welcome to do that. You can find that link anywhere online. But I think it's clear. I love my job. I love working with people. And I see success in so many different forms. Success is not, to me, being in a relationship. Success is being happy in whatever form that comes in. And if you learning how to end something after 3 dates because they're not the right one for you, that is equally successful. And so, yeah, I'll end with that.
That's real. That's progress. And that is growth. That means growing more secure as well in yourself and in whatever stage you might be in on your relationship journey. Erika, thank you so much for taking the time.
This was really fun.
It was. And for those watching and listening, I'll see you next time.